Alaric jolted awake in his quarters, the metallic taste of fear thick in his throat. His skin burned, the sensation crawling up his arms and neck, leaving trails of prickling heat. As he blinked into the dim light, he found himself unable to remember what had awoken him. A nightmare, a memory, or something else entirely. He ran a hand down his forearm, where faint ridges traced beneath the skin. Strange, raised patterns that had been appearing more frequently on the crew, though no one could quite explain them. The crew of the Erebus had been reduced to shadows of their former selves. Communication was sparse, conversation strained and quick, punctuated by glances over shoulders and darting eyes. The once familiar hum of the ship's systems now felt oppressive, each hiss and click, a reminder that something else shared the ship with them. Each member of the crew had begun experiencing the same symptoms: skin crawling, strange visions, bouts of disorientation, and a relentless paranoia that something was invading their minds, as if clawing its way into their memories. Dr. Liana Keller had been the first to piece it together. She had spent hours analyzing the strange substance that Mikhail had encountered, poring over samples under the ship's microscope. Her findings, initially fragmented and confusing, soon began to coalesce into a horrific understanding. "It's not just inside us," she whispered one day, her face pale, eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. She gathered the remaining crew members in the medical bay, her voice barely above a whisper, as if she feared the ship itself might overhear. "This organism isn't just a parasite, it's a hive. It's creating a network." "A network?" Farah's voice wavered. She had grown thin, her hair lank, and her eyes rimmed with dark circles. "You mean, like it's connecting us?" Liana nodded, her expression one of grim resolve. "Every time we experience those sensations, the crawling under our skin, the loss of memories, it's not random. The organism is embedding itself into our neural pathways. It's connecting our minds, turning us into parts of itself." Alaric clenched his fists, the faint, raised lines under his skin throbbing as if in response. "It's using us," he said, his voice cold, "feeding off us. But what does it want?" "I don't know," Liana admitted, her voice barely audible. "But it's not just feeding on memories, it's changing us, rewriting us." The realization that their minds were no longer entirely their own sparked a new wave of terror and distrust. Alaric could see it in the faces of his crew, suspicion brewing, a fear that had nothing to do with the vastness of space outside. Each of them began to withdraw even further, avoiding eye contact, isolating themselves within the cramped confines of the ship. That night, Mikhail finally lost control. He had been quiet since his encounter in the crawl space, his behavior growing erratic, his eyes hollow and unfocused. But now, he raged through the ship, screaming about something burrowing into his mind, something consuming his thoughts. He clawed at his skin, ripping at the raised patterns that had spread across his arms, chest, and neck. The lines, thin but distinctly unnatural, formed a lattice that pulsed and writhed beneath his skin, moving with a rhythm that seemed to match his heartbeat. "Get it out," Mikhail screamed, his voice ragged, his fingers slick with blood. "It's inside me. It's eating me." Alaric and Farah managed to restrain him, wrestling him down to the medbay table as Liana rushed to prepare a sedative. Mikhail thrashed, his eyes wild, his body convulsing as he continued to claw at his arms. Alaric watched, horror twisting in his gut, as thin tendrils of dark, pulsing matter began to push out from beneath Mikhail's skin, like roots breaking through the earth. Liana finally managed to inject the sedative, and Mikhail's thrashing subsided, his body falling limp. The crew stood around him, breathing heavily, their faces pale with fear. They could see the black tendrils retracting, curling back beneath the surface of his skin like worms burrowing deeper into flesh. Each crew member felt the echo of that invasive presence, a shared sensation, as if something deep within them was moving, shifting in response. Over the next few days, Mikhail's condition worsened. He lay in the medbay, occasionally twitching or muttering incomprehensible words. The network of dark lines spread, winding around his veins, pulsing in sync with his heartbeat. His body was changing before their eyes, joints stiffening, muscles tensing as if under constant strain. His skin grew paler, almost translucent, the dark matter within him more visible, a grotesque pattern of tendrils mapping the path of the alien organism within him. Farah began to show similar symptoms, though less advanced. Her arms and neck bore faint traces of the same pulsing lines, and she complained of sensations like small insects crawling under her skin. Alaric found himself scratching at his own arms, rubbing at the invisible presence he could feel beneath the surface, a sensation he couldn't rid himself of no matter how much he tried. The crew's sense of time unraveled as they fell deeper into the organism's grasp. Every few hours, new memories surfaced, alien and strange, like flickers of another life overlapping with their own. Farah described vast, empty plains under unfamiliar skies, the sensation of something foreign breathing through her, feeling every molecule of the ship around her, even her own crew members. Alaric began to see the corridors of the Erebus as twisted tunnels of organic matter, as if the ship itself was becoming an extension of the hive. He struggled to hold on to his sense of self, repeating his name, his rank, the names of his family, but the images felt slippery, faded, as though they were being siphoned away. Liana isolated herself in the medbay, monitoring the biological changes that were overtaking the crew. Her face grew gaunt, her hands trembling as she handled samples of their blood, which was becoming tinged with a dark, viscous fluid that moved independently, as though guided by a life of its own. She recorded her findings obsessively, speaking to herself in hushed whispers, documenting each horrifying change, each new development. "This organism, it's a hive mind," she murmured into the recorder one day, her voice brittle, exhausted. "It's not killing us. It's using us as extensions, hosts, our memories, our emotions. It's feeding on them, integrating them, weaving us into itself. We're becoming a part of it." Alaric listened to her recordings in private, dread filling him as he realized the depth of the organism's hold on them. The Erebus was no longer just a ship. It was becoming a living hive, each of them its nodes, their bodies and minds, merging into a larger consciousness. The invasive alien matter was reshaping them, transforming their cells, consuming their memories, all to serve its own purpose. The final straw came when Liana revealed her findings in one last desperate confession, her voice hollow and devoid of hope. "It's not just our bodies it's consuming. It's our minds, every memory, every thought. It's not just erasing them, it's absorbing them, replicating them. We're no longer individuals. We're fragments, strands in a web." The truth crushed them. There was no escape from the hive. They were becoming one with it, losing their individuality, their humanity, merging into something alien, something vast and incomprehensible. Alaric felt a numbing acceptance settle over him as he looked at his crew, now little more than shells filled with pieces of their former lives. One by one, they stopped speaking, stopped resisting, each surrendering to the silent rhythm of the hive, the pulsing beat that echoed through their veins, in sync with the alien matter that now controlled them. They could feel each other's thoughts, their minds intertwined in the web of the hive, their memories and emotions merged into a single collective consciousness. In his final lucid moments, Alaric tried to recall his life, his loved ones, the reason he had come aboard the Erebus. But the memories felt distant, like dreams slipping away. He was no longer Alaric Holt. He was a part of something greater, something ancient and unfathomable. In the silence of the ship, now a living hive drifting through the dark, the last traces of humanity faded, replaced by the cold, unyielding will of the organism. They had become one. A hive, a mind without boundaries, stretching into the vastness of space, forever connected, forever lost. Alaric Holt stood alone in the observation deck, his breath fogging the glass as he looked out into the endless dark. The stars seemed dimmer now, flickering like dying embers, distant and cold. He barely recognized his own reflection. His face, once marked with the signs of a life he'd left on Earth, was now almost alien to him, hollowed and lined with patterns that pulsed faintly beneath his skin. The tendrils of the organism were everywhere now, just beneath the surface, tracing dark veins along his arms, his neck, even into the whites of his eyes. The ship felt alive around him, the walls humming, the metal creaking as if responding to the rhythms inside him, and inside every remaining member of the crew. He turned, unable to bear the reflection, his memories fraying. But what memories he still held haunted him. Liana's frantic recordings, Mikhail's feverish screams, Farah's terrified whispers. They echoed through his mind like ghosts, fragmented and fading, fragments of humanity slipping away. He knew he was losing them. He could feel the memories of Earth dissolving, replaced by something vast, ancient and dark. Every day he felt more foreign, more alien, a faint echo of himself locked inside something he could no longer control. Dr. Liana Keller was the last to succumb. Alaric had found her hours ago in the medbay, her face drained of color, her eyes empty, her body cold. She had left one final recording, a chilling confession that he could barely listen to, but couldn't turn off. Her voice, once steady and assured, now wavered with despair. "It's all connected," she'd whispered, her breath shallow as though each word cost her the last bit of strength she had. "The organism. It's not just a parasite, not just a hive. It's a collector, a preserver. It consumes memories, identities, everything we are, and keeps them somewhere deep inside itself. It doesn't just destroy us. It keeps us alive, our thoughts, our memories, our lives, like threads in a web. And the more we fight, the deeper it roots, the more it pulls us in." Her voice broke, then fell to a whisper. We're still here, Alaric. Even when we're gone, we're still here. It remembers us. Every thought, every fear, every part of us. Forever." Alaric had shut the recording off, his stomach twisting as her words settled over him. Even in death, they weren't free. He felt the truth pressing down on him, suffocating him in its horror. There was no escape. Each crew member lost to the organism hadn't vanished. They were entangled, held within its collective mind, their memories and thoughts preserved like specimens in a museum. He staggered through the corridors, feeling the ship pulse around him, its rhythm a slow, insistent beat. The lines beneath his skin throbbed in sync, and with every pulse he felt pieces of himself slipping away. His mind filled with foreign images, alien worlds, landscapes he'd never seen but now knew intimately, sounds and smells of places that weren't Earth but somehow belonged to him. He felt himself fracturing, his memories merging with the alien ones, his sense of self eroding. The ship was silent, empty, but somehow full. Alaric could feel the presence of the others, Mikhail's rage, Liana's despair, Farah's quiet surrender. They lingered in the walls, in the shadows, in the very air he breathed. And somewhere within him, their thoughts, their voices, their fears wove through his mind, mingling with his own. In a final act of defiance, he returned to the observation deck, clutching the data pad he'd found in Liana's hand, her last recording still echoing through him as if it were his own voice, his own mind speaking back at him. "I am Alaric Holt," he whispered, forcing himself to say the words, to cling to the name that now felt like a foreign language on his tongue. "Commander of the Erebus. I remember," but the memories were fading, slipping through his grasp. The more he tried to hold on, the more he felt the alien presence inside him, pulling at the threads, unraveling them. He saw flashes of faces, his sister, his wife, his friends, but their features blurred, indistinct, their names lost somewhere within him. And in their place, the alien landscapes loomed, vast and eternal, places that had no end, no beginning, an existence he could not fathom but somehow belonged to. A pulse rippled through the ship, strong and insistent, and he felt it resonate within him, a beat that commanded obedience. His body moved of its own accord, a hollow shell responding to an unspoken command, and he knew, in a place beyond words, that he was no longer alone in his own mind. The alien organism whispered through him, its voice a cacophony of thousands, each one distinct yet woven into one. He could feel its awareness, ancient and incomprehensible, stretching across the vastness of space, spanning eons, reaching through time itself. And within its mind he felt the faint, fragmented traces of those it had claimed before him. Their thoughts, their memories, preserved and repurposed, woven into the fabric of the organism's consciousness. They were alive in a way, trapped in a memory that could never die. And now he was part of it too. His last act as Commander Alaric Holt was to pick up the data pad, his hands trembling, and begin a final recording, the words spilling out in a voice that was no longer his own. "This is Alaric Holt," he began, his voice hollow, mechanical, the cadence not his own. "Commander of the Erebus, I have made contact with an organism, ancient, endless, a preserver of memories, a collector of life." He paused, his fingers curling around the edges of the data pad as the organism pulsed within him, its thoughts blending with his own. "To whoever finds this, we are here, we are part of it. Every thought, every memory, everything we were is preserved. It will not kill you. It will consume you, keep you, remember you. Forever." He could feel himself slipping, the last fragments of his identity melting away, merging with the ancient consciousness that now held him. The last words he spoke were not his own, but those of the Hive, an endless symphony of voices woven into one, carrying the final horrifying truth. "We are infinite," he whispered, his lips moving to the rhythm of the hive's thoughts, the alien voice now his own. "We are forever. We are here." In the silence of space, the ship drifted on, its hull faintly pulsing, alive with the minds of its crew, their memories woven into the fabric of the hive, preserved and yet utterly consumed. The Erebus had become something more than a vessel. It was a memory, a fragment of humanity preserved in the cold vastness, carrying the stories of its crew, their fears, their lives, forever suspended in the timeless void. The stars outside continued their silent vigil, indifferent and unyielding, as the Erebus sailed onward, its crew no longer human, no longer themselves, but part of something vast and eternal, a hive mind stretching across the universe, a memory that would never die. And in the cold, echoing silence of the ship, the last traces of Alaric Holt faded away, lost in the depths of the hive, a final, horrifying truth etched into the endless void.